What you're doing, you're becoming a cultural mayor in grad school, the one who knows. As a cultural mayor, as a teacher, it's a responsibility to teach a correct history, to teach a correct knowledge. And that hasn't been done in the past. The truth is the truth, and one way or another it will be taught. I'm from the Ipai Nation of San Isabel, one of the 18 federally recognized tribes here in San Diego. If we look at the pedagogic system that has been used in the United States, it's filled with romanticized lies. I'll just call it like it is. As an Ipai, as a Kumeyaay, we are the survivors of a Holocaust. We are the survivors of a genocide. Our own native epistemology or organic science has been acquired through thousands of years. San Diego, the military has taken special interest in. Why? Just because of our location. It's a harbor, it's a bay. They dredged and they created a berthing for the ships. We're going on to sacred land, which is throughout here, and we have to ask for permission to get there. So that has been troubling.
I have taught here at UCSD for 35 years. My work deals with issues that have to do with militarism, migration, and refugees. Scripps Institute of Oceanography was the precursor to UCSD. UCSD was established in part to continue the mission of Cold War research and wasn't ever imagined to be a comprehensive university that we now are. Any of the issues that we are facing cannot be addressed singly by any of the disciplines. That kind of knowledge of what links histories and what links people is so key to imagining how we can work together. When we talk about the military, we're not talking about the Pentagon only. We're not talking about the armed forces only. We're not talking only about the federal budget that goes into defense only, but that militarism is also a culture that all of us are a part of. U.S. militarism, military practices around the world contribute directly to the displacement of the people in those parts of the world, and how then those people end up in San Diego, because San Diego is one of the largest refugee receiving counties in the U.S. So there's a lot of pain in thinking about what happened at sea. Yeah. If we want to understand how power works, we don't necessarily begin with power, but we begin with the people who are subject to the power.
I did 9 years in the Navy. I did not want to make a career. I wanted to get my education. I got that. But it didn't mean I was blind. I seen what was going on. Why do we have such a large Navy? To project power. You can paint it any way you want, but in the end, military science will trump anything else because it's for national security, and it's have an advantage over any adversary. They don't care what they do in order to get to it. The ones who have really helped, for the most part, have been the students.
I look at the way that the tides transfer energy to dissipation. I'm funded by the Office of Naval Research currently. I think that there's this idea of science as objective and neutral and ultimately innocent because of those first two things. The US empire expands into the oceans, and the most obvious connection is that a lot of oceanography research goes directly into the hands of the military, and as graduate students, maybe people who had a little bit more experience, we could create a space for people to start to have those conversations. The undergraduate to military pipeline is a term that we've started using in these workshops, but I think that it really refers to this path of least resistance that has been constructed between university majors and careers in defense. We usually start in a big circle, and we take a lot of time for everybody to share, especially in the first meeting, to really just get into like what brought you here. And I think that giving people that time to just expand and feel like they have space in the room is huge. Just working against that feeling of isolation and feeling like you don't have any options. It's a lot harder to make a career for yourself if you decide that you don't want to work in military-funded projects. And that's why I think it's important to have support networks to help people figure it out.
I have been at Scripps more or less forever, but let's just say many decades. Most of what I study these days are kind of the physics of resistance and how those resistance movements are tied to landscapes. Science students at Scripps and at UCSD have been expressing a dissatisfaction with the way that the science curriculum and the science that they study and they do research on is deeply connected to systems of power and injustice. I basically designed a course to introduce students to some of those critiques, introduce them to that literature, and then also introduce them to ways that people in the past and the present are organizing to create alternative ways of doing science. And I chose the title Subversive Science because subversion is basically this idea that we're going to be embedded within the system of power, but we're going to use that position as a way of undermining that system or aspects of that system in order to move towards justice.
A chapter of my thesis that I'm working on is the role that oceanography has played in imperialism and in colonization. The hope is that, through greater funding transparency and through telling these stories when we're training oceanographers, that people can come into the field with open eyes a little bit earlier and to use that context to make decisions about the kind of science that they want to do. It's hard to address problems that are important to communities that are affected by climate change if nobody wants to pay you to do that, which oftentimes nobody does. And I think that I would love to see a Scripps that is more capable of addressing problems that really affect people.
I study physical oceanography, particularly around Greenland. We have the ability to make local, small-scale change, and we're actually really fortunate that our university is huge. The people who founded UCSD Green New Deal felt like there wasn't a group that was taking kind of a higher level of protest action to challenge the way our local campus and university operates in terms of its contribution and complicity with the climate crisis. The military is a huge source and consumer, or rather a huge consumer of fossil fuels, and so a huge source of climate pollution. And that's a problem. We use an inside-outside strategy as a way to push as many levers as possible. At the same time, you're trying to make change within the institution, and then from the outside, you're trying to pressure the institution to change in dramatic ways. To paraphrase from Naomi Oreskes' mission, Science on a Mission, funding shapes the questions that we ask and therefore the answers that we find. Tobacco industry funding led to increased transparency and stricter policies in the health spheres. Coming from that perspective, it was really easy for them to see we need this for fossil fuels and climate research. The UAW transitional funding initiative, I know there were students at Scripps who were really keen to see that because they found themselves in the position of being like, oh, I'm funded by the military and I don't want to be, and I want to switch research, funding, PI, whatever, but like then I'll have this few months, who knows how long, period of uncertainty.
Transitional funding is a good idea for so many reasons, because it gives grad students more power over their own research.
I think it's really important if you're someone who's trying to push for some social change or institutional change to have community to do that with. One of the most memorable showings of community was during the UAW strikes. I think I was a part of like the biggest protest I've ever been in, where like thousands of us took to the streets up on main campus. And I just really felt like we were a mass movement of people demanding change.
Not only is this a job, but because it's a job, I have rights as a worker, and I have the right to try to make my workplace better. Like, all of those were actually mental steps to take.
I was studying paleoclimate, using ice cores and groundwater. When the strike started, I found myself, for the first time in a position where I was actually fighting for myself and not, trying to support somebody else. There are probably 100 Scripps students out on the picket line on the first day, like half our department, and that's wildly high for any kind of strike and picket. And that was really met with disdain, condescension, and so people were really increasingly upset, I think, over this gap in what we thought we were supposed to be paid and what we were getting paid. Chalking was really common for us all throughout the strike. People were chalking the street where we were picketing, we were chalking the sidewalks, we were chalking like concrete everywhere. The intention was always to make our message public and make our message not something that people could ignore. But it was never to damage, any infrastructure at Scripps. There was going to be like a event for this fancy new building, the MCTF building, an idea to leave some chalk messages, as we'd been doing for months and months before that, on the building. And those messages were all washed off the next day, even before the event started. And it was a whole month after that myself and two other people were arrested for alleged felony vandalism and conspiracy around chalking that building. The whole incident and even the university's justification was so ridiculous that, the support was pretty universal. Faculty wrote a letter saying that this is an inappropriate response by the university. Hundreds of people showed up to a rally at the courthouse on the day of our arraignment hearing. They'd be on the news and they'd be like, and so this is all for chalk?
The reason this is getting statewide attention, which we really need to emphasize, is because these students used chalk, right? And they're faced with felony charges.
I don't think that they would have resolved in as positive a way if we hadn't made a lot of noise about it.
Ideally we don't do harm to our community going forward. But I do think there's as we push for a better community, you're always going to be creating tensions. And we have to ride those out.
There's a violence associated with using the police as a way of solving an administrative problem. There's an extreme of violence associated with that. This place that we're on here, it is the site of the UCSD Gaza Solidarity Encampment. This encampment, which occurred last year, was something that was very much in line with student resistance at UCSD in the past. One of the wonderful things that kind of came out of that, and always comes out of violent events like that, is the support that develops afterwards. Deep in the bowels of the jail, we could hear the people out front like yelling and screaming and chanting. It was a beautiful, loud voice of resistance, and like one of the best times that I've had at UCSD.
What is the role of communities of color in higher education? What is higher education for? My answer to all of this is I go to the people who have the answers, because they have had to think about this for their own survival, rather than go to the people with power who don't ever think about it for their own survival.
I was taught by elders on both sides of the border. When they teach, they said, you may be in a place to teach. Don't let this die out. Continue teaching it. And that is part of our own culture, that if we have something that we oyao, that we know, we pass that on to the next one, because knowledge without sharing is not really knowledge. It's like that bundle of arrows. You know, one arrow, you're an arrow, you're an arrow, I'm an arrow. We can do many things, but we break easily. But when the three of us come together, we're harder to break. And when all of us come together, we are unbreakable. We're unstoppable.